Greetings, family. Welcome to IKG's Wisdom Wednesday. Today, June 18th, 2025. We are ecstatic and excited that you are here to join us for what we know will be a wonderful, enlightening, inspiring presentation. As always, we like to start off by acknowledging our family who's checking in. So we do ask that you drop in the chat where you're checking in from so we can shout you out. So we want to acknowledge our family checking in from, we have Yonkers, New York. Let's see here. I'm seeing South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Chicago, Illinois. Let's see. Accra, Ghana. Thank you for checking in from Accra, Suitland, Maryland, of course, the DMV. And my chat wants to go slow right now. So the names are loading slowly. But okay, I see California in the house. Welcome. Nevada, Maryland is in the house, of course. Welcome. We have Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for joining us. Silver Spring, Maryland. And go ahead and just drop in the chat where you're checking in from. If I'm not able to shout out your city, please charge it to the slow Wi-Fi and not my heart. All right. So, for those who may be new, IKG Wisdom Wednesday is a free monthly lecture series hosted by myself on behalf of IKG, founded by Egyptologist and historian Anthony Browder. We hold these sessions the third Wednesday of every month, where we bring to you speakers that address topics related to the Black African American experience. For more information on our Wisdom Wednesday lecture series, I do invite you to go to our website, ikgculturalresourcecenter.com, where you will find the full schedule for the year. Also, you can find the schedule for our Egypt on the Potomac field trip, which takes place the first Saturday of every month up until November. So if you haven't been, or if you want to invite a friend to attend, we do encourage you to go to our website, purchase tickets. They do sell out, and you definitely do not want to miss our Egypt on the Potomac field trips. Tonight, I am pleased to present to you all renowned scholar, master teacher, Professor James Small, who will be speaking on Of the Spirit, African American Sacred Science. Tonight's discussion will discuss the rich and often misunderstood legacy of African American spirituality, from its ancient African traditions and Black indigenous roots to the ways we infuse our spiritual power into modern religions. Professor Small will explore the distinction between religion and spirituality, the historical role of conjuring practices, and how our people use ancestral practices for resistance, healing, and empowerment. He will also address the modern resurgence of the interest in these traditions, the dangers of the misrepresentation, and how reclaiming our spiritual heritage is key to personal and collective liberation. Now, Professor James Small has an extensive biography, so I'm only going to share some highlights. He will speak more about his own personal journey, and I'm sure many of you all know already the great accomplishments of our speaker tonight. But Professor James Small is a scholar activist, dynamic speaker, and organizational consultant. He is CEO of Sanaa Lodge Enterprise in Ghana, the president of the African American Management Company in Ghana, International Vice President of the Organization of Afro American Unity, International Vice President of World African Diaspora Union, Priest of Oya Babala Orisha, the Ifa tradition, a retired Imam, of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, founded by Malcolm X, and past president of the Eastern region of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. He is also the chief historical consultant of MGM's Godfather of Harlem TV movie series. He's been featured in documentaries such as Happy, 1804, Hidden Colors, Out of Darkness, Heavy as the Crown, ABC's Disney's production Epic's documentary series, Whatever Means Necessary, and consultant and narrator for the Smithsonian Channel's documentary Cassius X Becoming Ali. Professor James Small's Cultural Heritage African Tours conducts educational and cultural pilgrimage tours throughout Africa, Haiti, and the United States. Please join me in welcoming Professor James Small to the stage. And as he's coming on screen, I do want to let you know that this will be a discussion, a Q&A discussion. And the first part will be a Q&A with myself and Professor James Smalls. And then as I'm sure you will have questions, I do ask that you place those questions in the Q&A box. Of course, engage via the chat, but if you want a question to be asked, I do ask that you place them in the Q&A box. And as this topic tonight is around spirituality, I do want to offer up a prayer to the great Mother, Father God, Onyame, the Abasum, the divinities of God, to our ancestors, that the knowledge, the information that's presented here today is well received and nurturing to your spirit, and that the intentional discussion that we have empowers and lift each and every one of you tonight. So, Professor James Smalls, welcome to IKG Wisdom Wednesday.
Thank you so much for having me on Wisdom Wednesday.
Yes.
This is an honor. Wisdom Wednesday is a famous forum for telling our truth. So I'm
Yes.
honored to be here.
Thank you. And I'm totally honored because I met you initially, for me, 30 years ago. In the mid 90s, I was a teenager in New Haven, Connecticut, and we
Mm,
would bring you uh, to New Haven with a group called the Black Holocaust Council to
yeah, yeah.
speak to our community. And although I was a teenager, everyone else was an adult. And that is when I first met you and really became aware of various speakers such as Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, and going to New York to the Slave Theater. So that's kind of where I was first introduced to you. So it's truly an honor. And I want to start our discussion out tonight by just hearing about your own personal journey, um, your upbringing, your early influences, and what led you to having this deep and profound knowledge of African spiritual systems and world religions.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I have all of this knowledge that is presumed, but I grew up in South Carolina, where I'll be tomorrow. Actually, I'll be in Georgetown County, Paulus Island, South Carolina, speaking at one of the major churches there for their Juneteenth, and joining them in their Juneteenth, the 25th year Juneteenth parade. And the next day, I'll be up in Columbia, South Carolina. I'll do a Friday night lecture at Benedict, and then Saturday at another community church, my niece's church. So I'm happy that the churches are now that I grew up in that space, who were once afraid of me. They're now telling me, come home and talk to us about these things that you have been talking about. But I grew up in Georgetown, South Carolina, in the county, not in the city, in the country. I grew up on a farm in the woods on a plantation called Arcadia, which was a combination of 7 formerly slave plantations owned by the Vanderbilt family. And my grandmother, Susan Pigeon Alston Small, who was the first generation born in this country on my maternal side, on my mother's maternal side, was what we call a root woman, an indigenous priestess. Her father was an indigenous priest, and her mother was an indigenous priestess. Her mother came from Sierra Leone. Her father came from what we now call Uganda. Of course, when they left those areas, neither of those areas had those names. Um, and I'm the son of Lucille Alston Small Johnson, and the grandson of Susan Small, and the great grandson of Hope Alston and Joe Alston. And on the other side, I'm the grandson of Andrew and Susan Small, and then the great grandson of Martha and Peter Small, and then the great great grandson of Andrew and Hannah Small. And those are the ones we knew that were here in this country. My father left when I was about 4, so I don't really know literally anything about his family. I met a few of them. Um, his name was Brockington, but I wasn't raised in that name or that spirit. I was raised in the spirit of Susan Small, Andrew Small, Lucille Small, Martha Small, Peter Small, a very powerful clan. We have a village that's just our families, 2 of them. One's called Simmonsville on Highway 17 in Georgetown County. And the second one is called Marysville. Simmonsville probably have about 100 family members. Marysville about 300 or so family members. And they're just family. So you can't marry nobody there. You can't date nobody there. That's just family. And it's been like that since some of us came out of the enslavement process. But my papa side, Andrew Small, we come from the Freewood. The Freewood, which is up that area, one of them is the largest. Freewood was the Maroon community. And so that area is up by Myrtle Beach, Murrells Inlet, coming into Paulus Island, South Carolina, right off of the ocean. So I'm a product of free African people, and then Maroon African people, and then a few enslaved African people. I was raised by a woman who you would call a hoodoo priestess, a root woman, a midwife, a healer, a herbalist. And that was my mama. That was my mother's mother. Her name is Susan Pigeon Small. She was a goddess of goddess, you know. So really, I met Malcolm X at age 16. I got involved in the civil rights struggle at age 13, 14, with the picketing of the Woolworth and the Strand Theater and the Palace Theater, those places in Georgetown that would not let us integrate with them. And then other things, closing down white stores in the Black community. So I played football in high school, so I always had a clan around me. And I was always a part of a group of Black men who was strong. Went to Savannah State College initially. Had to leave there because of a racial incident in the Naval Reserve. I was enrolled in the Naval Reserve. Served time in the American military. Um, I'm a war resistor in the war. I refused to fight in Vietnam. I refused to go to Vietnam even though I was in the military. I took a court martial instead. I wasn't negatively dismissed. I stayed in. They simply punished me by making me a librarian to isolate me from the population. Um, and that was a mistake because my best friends became books. You know, I became the book man, right? And so I met Malcolm X at age 16. My mother took me to New York to meet him because I'd seen him on television. My mother and my stepfather, who was my real father, when a man marry a woman with 11 children and raise those 11 children as his children, that's a god. His name was Paul Johnson. I love him so deeply, even now, and he's right on my shrine behind me. He was my beautiful father, my gentle father, my wisdom father, my political father. Um, and so I grew up in the midst of those people. You know, later in life, I would become, when I get out of the military, Malcolm was killed the year before I got home. I came to his organization, joined it, and 3 months I was the imam over the mosque and his sister's personal bodyguard, capacity which I served in from one capacity for 11 years, one for 18 years. But during that period of time, it's an interfacing. Most of the members of the Black Liberation Army, they came out of Malcolm X OAAU Youth Division. So the constant interaction with those brothers in the Panther Party, Zaid Shakur, that was the husband of Assata Shakur, that was my best friend. It was murdered on the turnpike by the state troopers. The Mumba Shakur, who was his oldest brother, who was married to Afeni Shakur, who's the mother of Tupac Shakur. So we were all like young people in the struggle. You know what I'm saying? Nobody was famous. Nobody was calling me, but they call us this, and it always makes me laugh. Master teacher. I'm not a master of anything. I'm just trying to learn at age 80, right? But I lived with those people. I met Sister Asada. I knew Asada. I did her security just before she went to Cuba. Never been ashamed of that. That's one of the golden linchpins of my character. To see that young lady who carries so much of our struggle's burden on her back, and had to exile herself from her family for life, um, having left her husband's body dead on that turnpike in New Jersey. Um, so that's the world I come out of. I was very, very much embedded in the Black Power political struggle in the 60s and 70s. When I say embedded, I mean embedded, right? There was something you didn't think you were going to survive. I didn't think I would live to be 25 and him 80. And so the gods had other plans. But all the young men and women that I learned from through those years and loved and who loved me and who we worked with, that's who I am more than anything. And those old people on the plantation and my mama who taught me the things that she taught all of her children about the herbs, about Africa. And this is an old lady who couldn't read or write, but she knew Africa and she knew we were from Africa because her mama and daddy was from Africa. I'm from the Mendi people of Sierra Leone, who is the people that we used to call from the early Mali Empire. We're the second largest ethnic group in Sierra Leone, if not the first. Um, I'm also extracts from genealogical extract from the Congo and Angola, who were the first people in the what became the rice belt in South Carolina, and of course some Yoruba, some Akan. But I am in stool as a chief for the last 44 years in the Ashanti Nation of Agogo. I'm Nana Kofi Mpansa, the second of the Agogo stool. Under my Omanhen, Nana Kwaku Sapong, who's Omanheni of the Agogo Kingdom. I'm very proud of that family that I was brought into and I'm a part of. And also I'm a priest in the Yoruba tradition. There I'm Obenjoko Adebayo. And that simply means the king who's returned to reclaim his crown, which is a good title because I've been trying to find that crown for decades. Yeah, so that's enough. But because most people don't know very much about me at all, they just know this guy named Professor Small. And so I just said that I give them a little bit of background of what I've been doing in 80 years.
Well, along those lines, you shared a lot about the your African origins,
Mm.
and I know we've spoken before. Can you speak a little bit to the Black indigenous roots that you have, and a little bit of that history?
Hmm. A lot of people now, like we're using the term Foundation of Black America, which ain't a bad term. I think I initiated much of that discussion years ago. I would I was using the term formerly enslaved Africans, trying to find a way to define ourselves in our own peculiarity, so we could nurture our culture like all other people do, black, brown, yellow, or white. And the African Americans seem to have always been everybody wanted to emulsify us, but nobody wanted to see us uh, coalesce as an ethnic nation. We are an ethnic nation one of the fourth largest African nation in any country in the world, one of the most powerful, one of the wealthiest, and one of the most aggressive in terms of fighting the imperialists and the colonialists and the enslaver 400 years nonstop, right? And we've taken a lot of loss, but we've had enormous victory that have helped people from all over the world to come here and
Absolutely.
enjoy a freedom that we bled and died for year after year, decade after decade. And
Mm-hmm.
most look at us like we didn't do anything. And yet, when they get in trouble, everybody look like, "Where's the black?" You know, go to
Mm-hmm.
black if you want to solve your problem. Even the crisis we have now with the Latino immigration community, everyone is looking to go to black. They're
Yes.
looking, where is the black? The
Mm-hmm.
black is sitting back because it says, did you remember that you were also black? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
you need to come to black, and then we'll
Mm-hmm.
be at your side. You know, that's another story. But to come to our indigenous roots, we were here before the so-called Indian peoples got here, the Asiatics got here. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason you have a red people because the black people and the yellow people married each other, okay? And you produce this ruddy people, right? That people call the red people, um, because we were here thousands and thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years before the crossings of the Bering Strait. You and I can get in a boat off of West Africa and just lay back and go to sleep, and in 2 weeks it would drop us off in the Bahamas like we were on an excursion, okay? And so it's one of the easiest crossing from another land into the Americas, and everybody want to ignore that it exists. Yet all of the slave ship followed the same currents that dropped them in the same place. That's Colombia was led here by an African from Elmina, Edna, in Ghana. Um, and he showed them the route that our ancestors had been using for years, thousands of years, to come for trade, to come to stay. Some have lived. If you go to Mexico, especially in southern Mexico, the elders will tell you there's two people here: the one that came before the boat and the ones that came on the boat. And the ones that came before the boat and the ones that became on the boat have amalgamated into one people. And so if you look at me, most times I'm about as Native American in features as I am African.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember as a child, my grandfather would take us. We didn't bury under the ground, we buried above ground. And so we would go clean the mounds every year and beautify them and get all the leaves and the branches off. And they would always have the utensil of whomever, whether that was a man or a woman. They would have whatever their job tools was, and we would shine them up and or paint them and place them on there. I didn't understand as a child what we were doing. I didn't understand the dynamics of of our pre-Columbian presence then. I just knew these were our people. I knew we had to clean the graves. Now we can't even get to the grave because the plantation owner who, when we were there, when I was growing up, they passed away, and their children is into their white MAGA kind of consciousness, So it isn't something. I suppose if I went and told that boy I wanted to, he would not be silly enough to say no. But I don't beg white people for anything. Even our ancestors' spirit, they go and come to that space.
Mm-hmm.
That's a space they go to, but most of the times they're out here taking care of their children, being their children, you know. And we're gonna get into that a little bit in the spirituality piece.
Yes. Well, thank you for that and for that making that distinction about Black Americans, African Americans being our own distinct ethnic group.
Hmm.
And it is in that vein that I would like to frame tonight's conversation, really focusing in on the Black American, African American experience here in the United States,
Hmm.
our spiritual experience.
Hmm.
And I say that because oftentimes, at least for myself growing up, we've had spiritual I've had spiritual encounters. I know people that have had spiritual experiences, and it wasn't necessarily tied to anything. It was just an event that happened. It was seeing a spirit. It was
It
having a
wasn't
prophetic
tied to
dream.
anything that you could recall at the
Right.
time.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. And we I speak to people, they have these spiritual experiences. We see things that people in our community do, whether it's pouring a drink down for someone who has passed on,
Mhm,
putting candles at a site where someone might have passed away.
mhm.
We
We
and we
never
don't
forgot
remember to
Africa.
connect it to
Right.
anything
Remember, we never forgot Africa. That's the key.
because it's in us, right? It's who
And
we are.
we were only enslaved in America 270 years.
Mm-hmm.
The only group in the Americas that was enslaved for a shorter period of time than us was the people of Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we weren't enslaved for 400 years. We used that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the total Western
Yes.
Hemisphere. But 1619 wasn't the beginning of enslavement
Mm-hmm.
as a
Mm-hmm.
institution. You don't
Mm-hmm.
really get it function until 1640s, and you don't see a maximization until the 1670s, and it's over by the 1860s, right? So you're talking about less than 250 years.
Mm-hmm.
And during that period of time, you had a massive amount of us that escaped, bought their way to freedom, so that by the time the Civil War came, you had something like about 400 to 500,000 of us that was
Mm-hmm.
known free, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another 4 million that would become free. But
Mm-hmm.
in that 4 million, if you go along the Gulf of Mexico, you go along the coast of Florida, you go along the Gullah Geechee corridor from South Carolina, Georgia to North Carolina, there was a population that, because of the malaria, mosquito, and the swampiness of those islands and the seashores, we were
Mm-hmm.
pretty much isolated for most of the year anyway, and
Mm-hmm.
we were just doing our African thing. And so yes, you had to amalgamate, and we had to creolize our language and culture like anyone else did. We
Mm-hmm.
go to any Caribbean island and we talk about their Creole. We
Mm-hmm.
go to Puerto Rico and we say, yeah, they speak Spanish, but they're not speaking Spanish.
Uh-huh.
Dominican Republic speaking Spanish, but they're speaking a Creolized Spanish. But when it comes to the African American, no one will accept that we have our own language. I cannot write English for peanuts because I can't think English.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't write it. I can speak it,
Mm-hmm.
but even speaking it, I'm speaking it with an African grammar structure, which means it sounds like English, but it's still not Creole. But I don't think in American White English.
Mm-hmm.
I think in an African Creolized English. Um, there's one brother that called it the Ebonics years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, we took our African grammar structure and we put the English vocabulary structure on top of it. And that's how
Yeah.
we think and that's how we function. And that's why we've been able to survive and thrive the way we have in America.
Mm-hmm.
But no
Mm-hmm.
one wants to accept that. But we better accept that we never stopped being Africans. We simply we jazzed it up. You know what jazzing up means? You
We
duplicate.
blackified it.
No, you imitate,
Mm-hmm.
and then you once you imitate the thing,
Mm-hmm.
you duplicate the thing,
Mm-hmm.
then you innovate on the thing,
Yes.
then you
Yes.
improve upon the thing. Well, that's
Yeah.
what we did, right? So that's when you look at jazz, those are kind of the sequences and steps
Mm-hmm.
they take to make that music speak that language the way they do. And
Mm-hmm.
jazz is really an African conversation being held between the different people we see on the stage. The guy on the saxophone is having a conversation with the guy on the drum, having a conversation with the guy on the bass, having a conversation with the guy on the guitar, having a conversation with the vocalist, and they're all having a conversation with us, and nobody can hear it but us.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We
Yes.
call it soul.
We call it soul. Yes, indeed.
So
So,
we have to just begin to just enjoy being the African that we were when the universe first manifested as humans. That's
mm-hmm.
who we are. When the
Yes.
universe first said it's going to do an experience that would be of itself, that we now call human, it became a black woman, and the rest of us her history.
Hmm. Yes. And so with that soul and taking what we received here in America and putting our essence into it,
Hmm.
you mentioned jazz, and I would add that we also did that when it comes to religion, when it comes to
We
Christianity,
did that with everything.
with
We
everything.
Yeah, it is how we survive. We do it today. That's what happened with hip
Hmm.
hop. Um,
Hmm.
but like many of our other communication forms, our enemy got smart enough to take it away from it, or to buy us to give it to him, or to
Hmm.
use us to profane it so it hurt us instead of helping us. Um, but it was a means of how do we communicate who we are, who are
Hmm.
we becoming to one another under
Hmm.
the duress of oppression in America. You know,
Yes,
and
yes.
music is one of the greatest communication instrument that the humans have ever designed.
Hmm.
So when you put something into music, it means my rhythm and my vibration is operating at a frequency that it can find unity with your rhythm and your vibration on that same frequency. And when we connect, we're in trouble if we're, opposite sex, because we get attached, we get attracted, we get attached.
Hmm.
And now that's where you need a culture to inform you on how to respond once the attraction and the attachment occurs, so that
Hmm.
you don't become the abusers of one another,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
become an intricate partnership and a builder with one another. And
Yes. So, and building on that, um, again, one of the purposes of this conversation around spirituality
mhm,
is when we are attracted or we are experiencing certain spiritual experiences
mhm,
that we may not have an understanding of. I hope that this conversation, that for those who watch it later, can provide some context so that we are able to be empowered by it, because unfortunately not everyone have an opportunity to be trained and cultivated and nurtured in their spiritual development, but we have these spiritual experiences. And I want us to talk a little bit about how we develop that, how these spiritual experiences live in our sacred science. So
mhm.
can you start off by letting us know, how would you define the difference between religion and spirituality within the Black experience here?
Let me add, the show, others will be, this is recorded, so people will be able to go back to it,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
I'm gonna read a few things so I can be
Yes.
very specific. The first thing we have to address is the thing we call consciousness. You know, and
Hmm.
I have a definition of consciousness. Is consciousness is to be immediately aware while mentally recognizing, to some degree and extent, one's own inner feeling and thought, or their objective references. Consciousness is to be mentally alert, well aware of some objects, impressions, or truth. A consciousness is the power of self knowledge, internal perception. Consciousness is the product of direct and convincing knowledge, whether of external or internal objects. And it's important because we talk about consciousness without really, and I have people say, well, I'm conscious, of they're conscious, the conscious movement. But consciousness is a process of coming into being, because there's another force fighting against you that's restricting and retarding your beingness. Okay. And so consciousness comes from having knowledge. That's why you hear me say history erases the mystery. You cannot develop your consciousness if you don't begin to truly learn the history, starting with the history of your family. First, your personal history, then the history of your family, then the history of the community in which they grew up, whether it's Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Chicago, California. There's a community that they were part of and interacting with. And then look at the greater history of the African people in that location, and then in America, and then expand yourself back to Africa. You see, because you're all of those things. You're not one little piece of it. You are all of those things. I am today my children tomorrow, or my children is my tomorrow. I am my parents tomorrow. My parents was my yesterday. My great parents was my great yesterday. We don't ever die in African ecology. I don't like to call it theocracy, but in African sacred science, there's no such thing as death. Okay. My parents gave birth to me, and when they did so, they gave birth to themselves. Even though they were still alive, they gave birth to these children. And people say, well, okay, if they give birth to you to 5 or 6, my mama had 13 of us, right? So she gave birth to 13 aspects of herself. All right. And even though we all were aspects of herself, we also contain the totality of herself, though the aspects is what we develop peculiarly. And with our dad, the same thing. That sperm, when it united with that egg, the egg in African culture represents the material. The mother represents the earth. For 9 months or 10 months, we are in her belly eating of her flesh, eating of every thought she has, eating of every nutrient she take in, drinking of every fluid she takes in. But we are an energy form that went via sperm into that place that now has the matter and energy uniting to recreate the two people who had that relationship, as they were recreated by the 4 people and the 8 people and the 16 people and the 32 people and the 64 people who are their grandpeople, going back to millions of people, and crescendoing with the first person, the first black woman, that when nature became human. Cosmology and ecology is what I'm referencing when I say nature. So then I go to, what is spirituality? Spirituality is reality. See, in this culture, we've been taught to make spirituality the aside, like they do religion. You can have this life, and then religion is a thing you do on Sunday and you reference when you get in trouble. But in African sacred science, the thing we call spirituality is your reality. It is being conscious of the moment you are living in, being guided by the wisdom of our collective ancestors and the divine laws of nature. And when I say the divine laws of nature, I'm talking about the laws of the ecology that governs the ecology that we're living as a part of, and the cosmology, which is in full partnership with it, right? Spirituality is a systematic understanding of our relationship to the Creator and creation, deriving from our ancestors' observations, examination, contemplation, and the study of the universe, the immediate environment, and ecology. Spirituality occurs when one is conscious of the immediate reality and is actively involved in it. And I would conclude on spirituality in its fullness is being conscious of and actively involved in your second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year reality. Spirituality is being communal, being collective, and being cooperative. And that is not to be confused with the European notion of socialism and communism, because communal, collective, cooperative spirituality in partnership with cosmology and ecology is way beyond what they're talking about. Africans see God as a totality of creation. That is, we see God in every and all things at once. The Ewe people of Togo call this Sogbelisa or Voodoo Dazi. That's where the word voodoo comes from. It comes from the Ewe language and the Fon language of West Africa. And the word means the essence of God. Okay? The essence of God, or the essence of the divine, or the essence of the universe and the cosmology and the ecology. So when you want to say voodoo dazi, you're talking about the essence of God in man. And if you want to say the essence of God in nature, you say voodoo daha. Okay. And so what we want, and the reason I want to read it, because I want people to study this. So when we think of our, how do you say, our sacred science, we think of God's power, which passes into the material world via humans. Because there's no God running around here like we see in the movies and flying through the air. You are the thing. Everything that God does on this earth, you do it as God. Okay? Then there's no God saving nobody for nothing. You either save yourself and the others, or nobody gets saved. Right? So there's four gates which God's power passes into the material world. And it's through right thinking, right speech, right feelings, and right actions. Right thinking, right speech, right feelings, and right action. And you'll find that coming up right out of the stolen legacy, as George G.M. James tried to describe Kemet, and how we had advanced these qualities and attributes that would allow us to be the divine being. God expresses itself in the world through the seven kingdoms. And what are those kingdoms? The mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, the insect kingdom, the fowl or bird kingdom, and the marine kingdom. And that's how the divine elements expresses itself. But we don't see anything called the divine running around and says, I'm God, I got a long beard, and I got a little stick in my hand. No, 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 no. We are, and I'll get to that. So I said, we are but expressions of aspect of the divine essence, expressions of aspects of the divine essence having this human experience. We must know that we are spirit in transition. Now, for this particular program, because was so much into Baba Tony's teaching, the last time I was working with Baba Asa Hilliard, which was about 3 weeks, we were in Kansas City teaching, doing a workshop for teachers at the African Center School, Dr. Nobles, Dr. Asa, and myself. And I could see he wasn't himself. This is about 3 weeks before, 4 weeks before he passed, because we would all end up in Ghana together and then go to Egypt. But I remained in Ghana because I was putting a roof on the hotel. So I said, Asa, he was helping me to learn how to use PowerPoint for the first time. PowerPoint was the great mystery, but Asa pioneered it ahead of all of us, right? And so I said, Baba Asa, what's wrong? I said, it's the day your spirit ain't. And then he just looked at me, he said, James, he said, we must know that we are spirits in transition. We're just spirits in transition. And I knew right then he was getting ready to leave us. And it was just the way he said it. And I'd never had anybody describe us that way before, that we were just spirits in transition. And so I took it further and looking at some of the teachings of our great ancestors, and I said, the great light, the divine, brought out of itself smaller lights, that's us. And it's only through constant replication that the great light, the divine, continues to exist and know that it exists. Because if the smaller lights that make it up stop becoming light and stop emoting, then the great light would disappear. See, we are the divine having this experience. Each of us represent an aspect of its essence. That's African teaching. Each small light represent an aspect of the personality or essence of the great light, the divine. And so, yes, we are all expressions of an aspect of the divine essence having this human experience. And so, when we get to understand that deeply, and people can look at this tape and study that, you like this piece, the genes, the DNA of God, the divine. Ancestors are your pedigree. You learn your pedigree from your history. God, then, you will realize, is your original ancestry. A people define themselves by referring to their origin. We are the best of our ancestors' genes. We are the latest version of our ancestors. We are the highest state version of our ancestors. Our children are the best of our genes, the latest version, and the highest tech. That may seem simple, but when you understand that, you realize when you're pouring libation to yourself because you're your ancestors coming forward, right? And so we get to religion. Religion is a tool of spirituality. The word religion comes from the Greek re, to go back or do over, and ligio, to bind. So religion means to bind back. What is it that you're binding back to? A religious system should bind a people or person back to the wisdom, the worldview, or culture of their ancestors and should bring about a belief binding the spiritual nature of a person or group to a supernatural or divine being, as involving a feeling of dependency and responsibility together with the feeling and practice which naturally flow from such a belief. Religion includes worship or the reverence of human spirit for the divine, seeking an outward expression. And so when we view religion that way, rather than just rituals, um, you get a better sense that it is a tool of spirituality, and it is a part of our greater sacred science. Just as music is not culture, it is a tool of the sacred science. Dancing is not culture, it is a tool of the sacred science. Together, your cultural system is your fundamental educational system that should be informing and instructing you from the day you're born until the day you transit back into ancestors. And so, as we begin to understand that's how Africa sees it. I wrote this little thing, which I like. Sister Felicia sent it to me the other night for the group who was going to Happy on a Journey. And so I asked the question of the people going on this journey. So I said, why did you come on this journey? And then I began to ask them a series of questions, right? Why did you come on the journey? Did you want something to wake you up? While you're thinking of your answer, ask yourself these questions. Am I indeed God having a human experience? Am I truly my ancestors? Am I the best of my ancestors' genes? Am I the latest version of my ancestors? Do I truly represent the highest tech version of those ancestors' genes? And I asked them the question, if you can answer these questions, you will truly realize that you are an expression of a divine aspect of the totality of creation having the human experience. Right? The ancestors left the signs, symbols, sculptures, buildings, and writings so that we would continually learn how to rebirth African consciousness. And that's a key phrase, rebirthing African consciousness. But you can't do that if you don't know who you are. You know, Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and them, they gave us yet they were Muslims, they gave us a good piece. Know thyself. You know, you got to know who you are, you know. And so the ancestors left the signs, the symbols, sculptures, the buildings, the writing. So we would continually learn how to rebirth African consciousness, both within ourselves and outside of ourselves. In the Yoruba, they call it Iawapile, the gentle character. And the Igbos call it Omanale, harmony and balance within and without. In ancient Kemet, it's called Ma'at, with the symbol showing is the harmony and the balance within and without. And so when we look at Aset is in you. Asar is in you. They're all in you. The Netchers are all in you. The Orishas all live in you. You know, they're just waiting for you to wake them up and train them to be the best they can be. Tell them I love them and hope they have a good time. This is for the people going to Kemet, traveling to Kemet. When we understand that Oya, I'm a priest of Oya. Oya is depicted as a beautiful woman with long locks and she's running through the forest, and she can transmutate. She can become an antelope at one time, or she could become a human at another time, and she just keeps transforming. And this is her symbol. And so this horn. And so I carry this sometimes. And I was in the UK a few weeks ago, and Joseph Bapunga, one of the great priests and kings, and Joseph, and I'm in my shrine, so I move around through things. So Joseph didn't know I was a priest of Oya, but this is the gift he brought me, a smaller horn than my Oya horn. And Oya, since she's an antelope, she's symbolized by the horns. And so we take the symbol, we understand this is just the symbol. This is just a horn from one of our great brothers and sisters, antelope or bull in Africa, and the same with this one. But it symbolized certain things that's essential for us. It symbolized change in, how do you say, in action that produce transformation. So you can't transform unless you change, but you can't change unless you desire to change. And so we have a story of Shango, who was a king. And one of my orishas is Shango, and my other orisha is Oya. But my center orisha is a very powerful force, which I wear this black and white bead for. And that force is called Shakpana, or Babaluaye in some cultures. And it has to do with the medicine. Because I got medicine all over the place. And because I'm getting ready to go to Africa, my shrine is in Trinidad. It is in my shrine is the Kenny Cyrus Ile Ijube. And the Kenny Cyrus Ile Ijube was established in Trinidad in 1897 by our founding fathers. But he brought the shrine from Carriacou, where his grandfather had established it. Carriacou is in the Grenadines off of Grenada. And our great father is buried there, and I visited his grave. But the shrine came to Carriacou from Haiti after the death of Dessalines and the Catholic Church and others, and the mulattoes did an attack on the voodoo community. And so that's the pedigree of the shrine that I'm a part of. My Baba was Baba Omatushu. He was from Nigeria. He was the minister of culture at one point, but he was a great Baba Larisha and Baba Lao. He's now an ancestor. And my mother's Joan Kenny Cyrus. And so her daughter, my god sister, who I raised, have now become my chief priestess. And she traveled all the way from Trinidad about last week, because in one of her readings she saw that I had some difficulty. So she brought some medicine all the way, just 2 days to come and bring the medicine and make sure I drank it in front of her, so she knows I'm gonna make this journey. I'm good to go. People say, well, what kind of medicine is that? Well, we are energy and matter. And energy and matter in its vibration and in its rhythm and its expression can get tampered with by other people's vibration and then rhythm and expression deliberately. And so you can ingest certain herbs and certain other kinds of plants that will make your vibration and rhythm operate at its optimum, so that others can't tamper with you and cause you harm. And that's why we try to eat right, eat appropriately, eat the right foods at the right time of day, at the right time of year, and those sort of things. Even eating is a sacred science. You know, we've been forced to innovate in the Americas. And even in Africa after colonialism, we were forced to innovate and eat what our enemy allowed us access to. And yet we were able to take that and twist it with our wisdom and knowledge into something good for us. Like collard greens was just a bitter weed that nobody paid attention to. But our ancestors said, working in this hot field, we need the iron. And that bitter weed has that iron. And so they made collard greens, and they cultivated it, nurtured it into a better weed than just the bitter weed, and still retained the iron content that we needed to work in that heat every day. You know, it may seem simple, And the same thing with the dandelion that's growing all over the place in everybody's yard. The dandelion that we see today wasn't the dandelion our ancestors met here. They cultivated, they work with that dandelion so that it can be a cleansing and a healing element in our bodies, you know.
Can,
And
can I jump in there on
mhm,
that concept and connect that to how we how we practice, I would say, Christianity
mhm,
in terms of um taking what we being given this religion,
mhm.
but then imposing and putting our own spirit onto it and giving it power. So I'll share that's this idea of Jesus. So I grew up Apostolic Pentecostal Holiness Church.
Oh,
That's how
oh,
I grew up.
baby.
And
I grew
so
up in a Baptist church, so it was
yes.
close to the holiness church in the country.
And from there, I became, and I am, a priestess in the Akan spiritual tradition.
Mm,
And
and on myself.
yes, and recently, I've been thinking about. So before I became a priestess, there was a stage where I was really, I would say, I wouldn't say anti-Christianity, but I understood.
Tell the truth. You were just
Yeah,
like you were anti.
I was learning that, oh, this religion was forced upon, my people, and we were forced into it. We were forced to give up our sacred traditions, and we kept aspects of it in Christianity.
Mhm,
Um, but it was, as you stated, we didn't connect it to who we were. We just, from my perspective, it's as if we received it as this religion from white people, from the Europeans, that we just took on ourselves. However, I also see it now that we embedded our own spirituality, our own power into that religion, where the Christianity that was inputted in us isn't the same Christianity that was the output that came from us.
mhm.
And I think about the concept and the idea of Jesus. And they say call on his name, and there's power in his name. And it was a point where I was like, no, Jesus is, this fictional, mythical person. Um, then I got into, well, if Jesus did exist, he was black. But now I'm realizing there is power in the name because we gave it power. The
Yeah.
the black people in those churches
We
gave
could have said
power to
we
that
could have said Hoopoe and had the same power.
and had the same power. So there is power in that. There is, like, I think about the
There
prayers
there is
that were
there is
given from that.
power in intent.
An intent,
All
yes.
content has
Mhm.
intent. And
Mhm.
so the content is your thoughts, the content is your words, the content is your singing, the content is
Mhm.
your shouting, the content is your aspiration, the content is your needs and desires, the content is your yearning, but it
Mhm.
must have intent.
Yes.
Christ became the intent of our yearning and content. But if
Mhm.
we had used another, we could have done the same thing with Moses. We could have done the same thing. The thing is, they're innovations,
Yes.
and an innovation can help you for a while,
Mhm.
and it can solve some of your issues,
Mhm.
but it's still not you in your totality.
Mhm.
But let me give it more credibility than that. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are mere fragments from the
Mhm.
periphery of the African sacred science system.
Yes.
So the European not having the capacity to hold spirit couldn't, when he took the body knowledge from us,
Mhm.
much of those metaphor, allegory, and stories, the ancient African metaphor, allegory, and story. The Jesus concept is the Haru concept, and even before Haru, there was those same concept in ancient Ethiopia, Nubia, and Congo of
Mhm.
that special child,
Mhm.
which really means all children have the potential to be that special child that would become to be the savior of the community, that will instruct and inform them how to overcome obstacles and survive the contradictions of life. And so they took it and made it a special child and the
Mhm.
only child. But
Mhm.
that's not what the African was saying. The
Mhm.
African was saying all children, men and women children, is the potential of what is declared to be the Christ. Right? Somebody misunderstood that and came up with this one dude who was going to save everybody. And he ain't saved nobody, because ask the people in Iran right now, ask the Palestinians who's in the land where he was born, ask the black folks who was enslaved for 400, 500 years with the genocide and the rape, if all that screaming and calling on his name saved them. You know, I remember when I was little, saying, "Oh, we're down here in trouble, Lord, calling on your name, oh, calling on your name." Now, a lot of good came from it, like you were saying. We were able to infuse an energy there, and we were able to call that name and make that vibration help us overcome the contradiction. But we have to go further than that, because we haven't been able to reconstruct ourselves as it. But what is called Christianity is born in Africa, but not as we received it from the British, okay, and the French and the Dutch. That's not what was born in Africa.
Mhm.
And what was born in Africa under Roman domination, because we were under domination and we had to innovate on our own system to survive. And in our own innovation, we had to share with them, hoping that that would humanize them enough
Mhm.
that the genocide would cease.
Mhm.
Because we had been through the genocide of the Greeks. We had been through the genocide of the Persians. We had been through the genocide of the Hyksos. We had been through the genocide of the Hittites. We had been through the genocide of the Assyrians. Now we were in the genocide of the Romans. And many of us left Northeast Africa, Northeast Africa. But many of us were forced to stay. So what do? We have to create a system of knowing ourselves and knowing divine to survive under the system of oppression we find ourselves. And that is the birth of Christianity. Now, the white folks couldn't deal with it from a spiritual perspective because they didn't have the capacity to hold spirit, but they're intellectual superstars. You know, they could remember stuff and they could calculate stuff because we gave them those tools way back in the days of the Greeks. So, in the Akan tradition, which you're a part of, it talks about man has three souls. You know, and when we think of the concept of the three souls, it feeds right into Jesus can also be the human and be the Father God at the same time, and yet have a spirit. You know, that's right up out of Africa. It's not foreign to us. So when we were reintroduced to what was originally our thing, that had now been innovated on by our enemy, we had to find a way to transmutate, to transform it back into our thing. And so that's what the churches, which became sanctuaries, the only sanctuary we had to
Mhm.
protect ourselves and to be African. So we hid what Africans we had in the church. So you can go in any white church, Baptist church on Sunday, or white holiness church on Sunday, and then go to a black holiness or black Baptist. You'll see you in two completely different churches, reading the same scripture,
Absolutely.
singing the same songs,
Mhm.
but there's something different going on
Yes.
because we brought the African essence and spirit back into the thing.
Mhm.
You know,
Exactly.
it's like listening to that little. It was such a simple song when we were children. Wade in the water, children.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
God don't trouble the water. You know. So we there was one song I actually liked. There was this old lady because she could shout, but
Uh-huh.
shouting was ethnic dancing, right?
Yes.
So
Mhm.
we couldn't dance outside, but we could
Mhm.
dance in the church on Sunday. We
Mhm.
couldn't call it dancing because the white folks would be mad at that. So we called it shouting, shouting
Mhm.
for the Lord. And
Mhm.
she had this thing that's called, "Oh, I'm leaning on the Lord. I'm leaning on the Lord. I'm a leaning on the Lord who died on Calvary.
Mm-hmm.
And she would do that little rhythm thing leading up. Then she would jump out and get into an African dance step, and it's called "Tell Me How You Feel When You Come Out the Wilderness, Come Out the Wilderness, Come Out the Wilderness. Tell me how you feel." And by the time she got that rhythm up, the whole church was in it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was dancing. Three
Mm-hmm.
people would get possessed. They would take
Mm-hmm.
off their glasses, take off their earrings, unhook their bras so they wouldn't hurt themselves, and just let them be free. You see that happen in traditional. They do almost the same little rhythm right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they would dance all over this church.
Yes.
And we call it shouting. But if
Mm-hmm.
you looked and took a video of the dance step and go back to Africa, you could find the very village that person was from the dance
Mm-hmm.
step they were doing in the church. But it
Mm-hmm.
isn't just the dance step.
Mm-hmm.
In those movements, right, was a rhythm that stimulated and caused vibration in the body to then seek a higher communion with divinity. Even though we were using the Christian motif, because that's all we had to use,
Mm-hmm.
we had to take the African thing and hide it in the Christian thing and let it manifest when we were in those sanctuaries.
Mm-hmm.
So you're very right. We just have to say it right. So
Yeah.
we don't think we created a new religion, because that's not what we
Right.
did.
Right. Right.
We came in with the Akan stuff and the voodoo stuff and the Congo, and we still have it. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't lose it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We just hid it in the church. But now we won't recognize it unless we get on a plane and go hang out in Africa a little bit. So wow, that's what Aunt Titty used to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Fat Joe used to do. Hey, but Pete, that's his movement. Because yeah, because that's where they got it from, you know.
Yes.
And so the Christian church and our people were aware of this. Now they were not unaware of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But in this last, I say, 50 years, we have not been able to carry out the intergenerational transmission of wisdom in a way we should, so that we would know what we hid in the church. But we can find it when we begin to study the history of Africa, when we begin to get into the culture, when we do as you have done and others have done and I've done, become priests of the craft of the ancestors, then we realize we ain't that different. I may wear a different kind of clothes when I'm doing my Akon, and I may wear different kind of clothes when I'm doing my bimbe. But if I go into church and put on their clothes, I'm making the same movement. I got the same body movement. I'm doing the same things. I'm calling on the same name, just in a different language. I may say Oludumare, they will say Jesus. You know, I say Nana Nyami, and this one will say Allah. But what are we saying? We're
Mm-hmm.
all making a vibration to the divine, to cosmology and ecology, and we take whatever name we use, and we take the vibration that is our intent and
Mm-hmm.
create a rhythm pattern that the universe recognizes.
So speaking of intent, I want to bring in another aspect of our spirituality and through um I'll say Christianity, and that would be what I'm calling right now manifestation theology and
Mhm,
in the work of Reverend Ike
mhm,
and the power of intent, the power of thought, the power of the power of our thought, the power of our
mhm.
word, and
Yeah,
how that became also infused um, through his teachings. Can you speak a little bit about that?
yeah. Reverend Ike was very well trained in sacred science, and when people who are ignorant of that body of knowledge, they give it labels. So it becomes metaphysics. So it becomes what you just label it. But Reverend Ike didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Somebody trained him. All right. He understood, like he used to say, we were God having a human experience. He was saying this way back then. He was saying you can call something into being and it would come into being with your vibration, with your voice, with your intent. Um, that's simple voodoo practice. That's simple Yoruba Akan practice. That's simple African practice. But it was not simple because America didn't allow us to manifest that kind of behavior towards the rest of cosmology and ecology. We thought they really beat us into thinking that we were appealing to a man or appealing to a woman, but mostly appealing to a man and not appealing to the totality of creation itself. That can manifest itself as anything it want to be, from a bumblebee to a cow, you know, to a human, to give the message necessary for healing the human spirit, you know, to create a dynamic environment for us to live in. A community is made up of everybody in the community, and everybody from the youngest to the oldest have a role in that community. And that's why we created processes that we call rites of passages, that everyone at some stage of life in the community had to go through right until the last rites of passage, which is death itself. Funeral is a rites of passage, right? And when the baby is born and come into the world, and we don't outdoor them or bring them to the public for 7 or 8 days, the rites of passage process is we have to see who came back. So you bring in the elders who knew the elders who had left, and they look over that baby and they hold that baby and feel that baby. You bring in the priests and priestesses who knew what the spirit was, and when they realize who has come back, then they would name the child, and then they would then present the child to the public. That's the first rite. Well, that's not the first rites of passage. The first rites of passage is when the woman announced, "I'm pregnant." Okay. And the second rites of passage is when she's moved back to her father's house to have that baby and not her husband's house. You know, there's all these processes we created for a reason to make the society healthy so that we would know the environment we live in. When we talk about sociology, all sociology is an attempt by the human being to create cosmology, to recreate cosmology and ecology. We are studying the laws of nature, we're studying the laws of the universe, and then we are trying to create those laws into social construct so that we can live in the same harmony that the universe and the ecology is living in. That's all we're trying to do. That is our sacred science, you know. But in that is our healthiness, in that is our joy, in that is our, like I wrote down a lot of principles, but I knew we were going to talk about religion a little bit. Just read off a few that we take for granted, right? That we need to have in our character. You know, like one of the things is worship, and that's that act of feeling or adoration for 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 the divine, and then devotion, a strong attachment or affection to that thing we call divine. Then principle, a law of nature is formulated and accepted by the mind, an essential truth about which other truths are based, right? And then we want to go into what is character, the total quality of a person's behavior, a revealing in their habits or thoughts and expression, attitudes, interests, and action. And that means they must develop certain attributes, a quality property to or characteristic of a person or thing, as as harshness or as an attribute of steel, showing that you've got to develop these attributes. Then there's ethics relating to morality or behavior. Then there's morals concerned with the right and the wrong and distinction to keep harmony and balance around you. And so there's a whole body of knowledge. If you were a Muslim, I was an imam for a long time, and you don't hear nobody talk about it. But in Imam, in Islam, they say Allah have 99 names. It's called the 99 Pearls of Faith. They're the 99 Obusun. They're the 99 Orishas. Okay? Every Obusun in the Akan tradition, every Orisha is a quality and attributes that's both in nature and cosmology and is possible to be developed in the human character. There's always one that is dominant or two in all of us. And that one becomes the guiding. That's the one you develop first and quickly. But you can develop a whole bunch of the other ones once you've got that one that was given to you at birth as your guide, something we call them our deity or whatever. Those are just words trying to describe something. But what it's trying to describe is a quality and attribute of nature, a quality and attribute of cosmology, a quality and attribute of the human character that you are. You're made up of billions of years of experience, and in your own peculiarity. There's no other person among the trillions and trillions of spirits that have ever evolved like you, designed the way you design. 1,000 people can say, a Daddy Kofi, I got a Daddy Kofi, but each one is going to have a different Daddy Kofi. Each one, 1,000 can say, oh, I'm Oya, or I'm Yemaja, but it'll be 1,000 different aspects of Yemaja that you develop in your character in relationship to your experience in the environment you find yourself in. I hope that makes sense, um, because we are the universe. Remember, you too young to remember Roots. You ever saw Roots?
Yes,
And you remember
that's our
Kunta
roots.
Kinte when he's a baby and they hold him up and they
Hmm.
said, behold,
The only
the
thing
only
greater than
thing greater
yourself.
than you, the
Uh-huh.
universe itself.
Yes.
That
Yes.
was a deep piece.
Yes.
That is a deep truth. The only thing greater than you is the universe itself.
Mm.
Eh?
So, Professor Smalls, for the audience, if you have questions, go ahead and start placing them in the Q&A box. I am going to start incorporating some of the questions from the Q&A. So, I would like if you could speak to a concept that I hear you talk about, a seed within a seed within a seed. I'm not sure how you say it, but you
Oh,
bring
that
this.
that's about Baba Fukia out of the Congo.
Okay.
That's when he's talking about his book on spirituality of the Bantu Congo. And he's saying that as children, they would recite this
Mm,
mantra, but that explained the totality, that they were a seed of a seed of a seed in a seed of a seed, which simply means we are the universe. We are the totality of everything.
okay, so I'm going to connect that to MJS's question. How is it that we are reincarnations, yet we can still call on our ancestors? Is it that only part of us get reincarnated?
I knew somebody was going to come up with that one. You know, a very good question. But first, we have to understand that we are our ancestors. No one can see the going out of being. We can see, um, but it's 400 and something different minerals that make us up, or that make up our bodies. Um, and if you took it and let it deteriorate, you just have a handful of dust, because 70% of what makes us up is water. And you split it, and it's oxygen and hydrogen. And so we are what? We are the universe. We are the air. We are the water that comes from the combination of the air. We are the minerals, the zinc, the iron, the manganese, and so forth that makes up this physical thing that we call our body. And at some point in the wear and tear of the environment, it gets tired and it deteriorates. But it doesn't disappear, it dissipates, but it doesn't disappear. And we put it in a box and we bury it. Now, the white man has done something we hadn't paid attention to. I'm going to try to tell people, stop putting the people in these caskets of steel, put them in wood so that they can rot and return to the earth and escape the grave. But you can put them in a steel container, then stick that in a cement box, and then cover that up and stick it in the ground, and you're trapped trying to get out of there. That's why in the Muslim world, you get buried without any embalming in 2 to 3 days in a little wooden box in the earth so you can go back to nature. All right. So the water that was in your body can evaporate and go to the sky and become the rain and come and grow the plant that the next generation eats. They told me that one a long time ago. And I'm like, really? Yeah, that's deep, right? And so, and the minerals can become the nutrient for the next tree or grass that grows, or plant that grows in the earth. And from it, the seed spread to someplace else and someplace else. And there you are all over the world feeding people, because there's no such thing as death. So when we come back in incarnation, the Yoruba call it Awo. And they said in Awo, I just did a piece on it, that we have to go and come 8 times. And in each going and coming, we have 12 steps we must master in qualities and attributes in order to escape the going and the coming. Right. And so, and they said that you're always born in the Ibi that you originally came in, meaning family. You're not going to come back as a bumblebee like the Asian stew or as a tree. You'll only come back as a human being, and you only come back in that family line that you were originally in. Okay. And so we are all made up of aspects of the divine. Remember, God is our primary ancestor, the divine. And we are all made up of aspects of it. We are the tiny little lights proceeding from the great light. But without the tiny little light, there is no great light. Think of that. And so when we come back into the earth, we don't come back in the same configuration, right? We come back based on what the ancestors, who are free of the coming and going, see as necessity for the ones who are still back here. So when we understand that, then it's easy to see how you can flow and come. Because it's like a mother. She has 4 children. And if they're all her, but they're all different aspects of her. Yet they contain the total potential of her. That's like the story of Christ you were talking about. You know? Though he's a flesh walking around, he's also still the divine, but so is each and every one of us. So the story was never supposed to be about one man, it's supposed to be about all living beings. This is their story.
Yes. So when you share that, it reminded me when my mother was making her transition during that time um, of it was a process. So during that time, I remember I was laying down thinking about the fact that my mom was getting ready to transition. And, the spirit came to me and said, when you get sad and you want to think of your mother and you want to reach out to her, just rub your own hand. Just rub your hand, and that'll be you
Hmm.
rubbing her and touching her. So
Hmm.
I just like sometimes I'll just rub my hand when I miss my mother, and I get a sense of a comfort. I get a comfort in that. So when you said that, it made me think of that. But and along those lines of burial, Carla asked, "What are your thoughts of cremation?"
Freemason,
Cremation.
cremation.
Hmm.
Well, different cultures around the world, depending on the ecology they were in, had different disposable practices. Um, so there were places where you didn't have burial room space. And so you would cremate. What happens? You use heat to simply melt the matter and reduce it to ashes. The water evaporates back into the same ether. You know, the ashes is the same zinc, iron, manganese, and the same dust that would have rotted and deteriorated into a handful of dust. So I don't see a contradiction. I think a lot of our people I know, because in my family, when you say cremation, they go like, "Whoa, no," you know, because we were grown into the Protestant burial tradition, which I understand. And cremation has become a new phenomenon for us, partially because of economics, because funerals have become so expensive that we can't afford them. Funerals can go anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 now, and many families try to do that because at the end of life, we've been taught to give us everything we didn't have in life. So you didn't have a Cadillac in life, but you get to ride in a Cadillac now. You know, you didn't have too many friends, but everybody gonna come and say goodbye to you right now. No one said much about they loved you, but everybody gonna come and cry and tell you how much they loved you now. So there's a lot of things in the ceremony of funeraling that make sense. But there's always nothing I learned from my teacher, uh, Professor Akinjoba out of Nigeria. There's nothing static in the culture. He wrote a beautiful book on culture and history and culture of the Yoruba people, Professor Akinjoba. And he says there's nothing static in the culture. Some things in the culture you have to discard and replace with new things. And that's not a contradiction. People say, oh, well, we do this because they used to do this. But if what you do have no relevance to where you are now, discard it and put something more relevant, positively relevant in its place. That's normal. That's innovation. That's how we get jazz. I imitate to innovate, and then I improvise. That's what they call impresarios. You know, Once I start improvising on it, I can then take what used to be and create what needs to be.
Okay. So, the next question comes from Talitha, and she asks, what about Christians who speak in tongues? Does that come from African spirituality?
Yes, if it's earnest. Now, some people practice speaking in tongues, and you're a priestess. I'm a priest. And we practice certain dances and things that we emulate. Somebody else will see us, oh, they're possessed. But we've learned that dance, but we've learned it for a purpose to carry spirit, right? And so when you see people speaking in tongues, there's some, because I've been, in the ministry in one form or another for 60 or more years. If you go to a good seminary, people are even taught how to stutter when they're preaching. It's a methodology of conveying emotion in language, right? And so some people are taught to speak in tongues, but most people, especially when you go to the smaller churches, especially in the urban centers where they have these little, we call them the hole in the wall churches, drinking at the well church, you talking about straight up African stuff up in there. And so the spirit of our ancestors, of us when we were our ancestors, come to be with us. We are these multi-dimensional beings, right? Multi-dimensional beings. I am my mother, I am my father, I am my grandfather, I am my great father, I am my great great father. But each of them had a different experience with the world. And I can borrow from all of those experiences, and they will loan those experiences to me because it's me loaning the experience of myself in a time before myself to me. You know? So when people are speaking in tongues, the language never left us. It's in a cell somewhere in our brain, right? The concept of our ancient attitudes is in a cell, in a genome, someplace in our brain. And the right rhythm, the right song, the right vibration, the right temperature can bring that into being. And a language you've never heard of, you can be speaking it because that's you from before this time, bringing that energy forth into you in this time and expressing yourself to yourself because you've created an environment that can house it, if that makes sense to you. You've been
Absolutely.
possessed before, and you know that those who do not have the capacity, they haven't trained well, studied well, to house that spirit have a difficult time. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we got to bring them back and not let them go on the journey, you know, because they're not yet prepared for that energy that
Mm-hmm.
once existed in the physical form still exists.
Mm-hmm.
And once you create an environment that can invite them to manifest, they're going
Yeah.
to express itself through you.
Yeah. Yes.
We see it in the Voodoo tradition. We see it in the Akan tradition. We see it in the Yoruba tradition. We see it in the spiritual churches, in the Black community, the Christian churches all around the country. When I was on the Monin bench, I
Mm-hmm.
was initiated into the Christian church. I was 13, and we all had to go on the Monin bench together. Everybody who was 13 that year went on the Monin bench. So that's the African age set practice that we do all over Africa. And at that point, we we weren't blindfold, but you had to keep your eyes closed. When I went through the same training in the Yoruba tradition, I was blindfold, right? And your people are singing over you. Each family had their own rhythm and their own song that they sang for their child in turn. So my family was singing, everybody was singing that. I remember, save me, Lord, save my soul from the burning hell. But when the thing got good, oh, save me, Lord, oh, save me, Lord, oh. And so the whole church is singing. And when my family got finished, another family would sing over their child, their special song. So that was the families carrying the intergenerational vibrations and rhythm patterns into their child. I think on my fourth day, you're on the bench, you get 6 days. On my fourth day, I got possessed. They don't call it possessed in the church, so they got the Holy Spirit.
I was going to say catching the Holy Ghost. I was going to ask, can you speak to
Yeah,
catching the Holy Ghost?
you're
Yes.
possessed.
Uh-huh.
You're out there dancing and shouting and doing all them things and speaking in
Mm-hmm.
tongues until it gets you calmed down. Then you could become a member of the church.
Mm-hmm.
That's just as African can be,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we look at all these things, we realize the ancestors had ways of they saved these things and they brought it into our world, but we have not done a good job in the intergenerational transmission of this knowledge, of this wisdom, so the next generation know what they did. Partly because of the fear and the intimidation, and people wanted their children to live and not get killed by these terrorists, and so forth and so on. And so they thought they would administer it to us, but not telling us, realizing that we had to figure out how to administer it to the next generation besides just mimic.
Mm-hmm. So with that, can if we could take this into the direction of self-empowerment and how we used, well, I mean, you are speaking to that, how spirituality has been one's personal development.
Mhm.
And you mentioned fear. And one question I wanted to ask, so recently I've been seeing online some preachers who make comments like spiritual cleansing using sage is demonic. Having dreams of what they call familiar spirits or ancestors is not of God. Now, I take issue with that because our practice has been that even though we were, I don't want to say Christianized, but we took on Christianity, we still held on to our spiritual practices and beliefs within Christianity. And now I'm seeing more, and I don't know if this hasn't been the case in the past, but at least right now, there's more talk around demonizing our own spiritual power
Mhm.
within the
Well,
church.
yeah, well, the church has become, for the most part, a very lucrative economic business for those who run it. Preachers, the deacon boards, the whatever the board of directors, they're making money, billions of dollars every year off of the poorest people in the population, um, pulling on their desperation and their hopes and aspirations, um, but not delivering anything to them except some emotional comfort, some psychological comfort for the most part. Now, there's some churches who are teaching good direction and guidance. Let me be clear on that. There are some churches who are teaching and helping people to grow. And there's some churches who are bringing the economic back to the community. But too many of them, we see the mega churches and people riding around with planes, private airplanes. How do you have a private airplane when there's one person impoverished in your population? got their Rolls Royce and the Mercedes and their big $1 million homes. How do you do that? That is profane unless everybody in your congregation have an opportunity to rise out of poverty, right? Because each of the churches in the early days of our building these churches was a village. All right. It was a communal, collective, cooperative village. The
Yeah.
church was at the core and the center of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now the church had become an economic addendum that
Mm-hmm.
do the same kind of exploitation that the capitalists and the imperialists, rapists, and genocider have been doing to us for centuries. And so those who are seeing people asking for a different church, and those who are seeing people are looking to other alternative ways of finding the divine within and without, they're the ones making those criticisms. You know, tell them to show me their congregation. Tell them to show me in their congregation that they've stopped the rape, that they've stopped the incest, that they've stopped the drugs, that they've stopped destroying the youth like they did Whitney Houston and so many others. Her destruction didn't come from Bobby Brown, it came from the church, you know. And Whitney was just, and baby, you know, I'm not defaming you, I'm just using you as an example. You're just an example of how they've destroyed so many of our babies using the church as a cover for Eurocentric demonism without understanding that that church that the European bought is a house of demons. Our people were able to transform it because we had no choice to maintain. We had to maintain its facade, but we transform its internal being. Now there are those who are trying to make the facade the internal being. You know,
Mm, okay. Okay.
I want you know that we are taught even in that system, know the truth, and it is the truth that shall set you free, and that truth alone will set you free. Okay, and really in the Bible, the literature, the body of literature that our ancestors put together for the whites, and I think it was the Pope, not the one that just died, the one before him, when he was on a visit in Cameroon, and this came out in Time magazine, European Time. They don't give us the same magazines over here. Where he told the people of Cameroon that 8 out of the 10 original authors of the Bible at the Nicene Conference was Africans. And this is the Pope, the Papa, saying this, right? And you've seen, because I was one of the first ones to circulate the photos of them praying to the Black Madonna and Child in the Vatican, you know. So they understand that they've used religion to control the masses, the Western world. And we have so many of our people trained in their theology and their ideology who are using religion in the same way, not to free people, but to suppress and oppress people, to enrich themselves and to glorify themselves. No, the greater knowledge you get, the greater servant you must become. Okay. If people could only learn that, the more God give you, the more you should give away to those who are in need. Okay. That's what being a priest is about. That's why if you study history, a priest or priestess is always someone they don't own their house. They're walking from city to city, but the people take care of them. The people feed
Mm-hmm.
them and house them because they know what has come to them in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't own anything, you know. Like I hear people tell the story about Mansa Musa was the richest man in the world. That's not true at all. Mansa Musa couldn't own anything. And if Mansa Musa acted like that was his wealth, he was in total violation. And maybe that's what brought the contradiction of hell down on us, with him taking all that gold to Mecca. For what? It wasn't his gold to take. It belonged to the community. You know, I'm Nana Kofi Mpansa. When I sit on my stool, James Small is dead, Nanakopi Apansa sits on that stool. I sit as the ancestor. All right. The community makes sure I got what I need, but nothing belongs to me. Those are the little nuances we need to understand about what they would call our theocracy.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Michelle, looking at another aspect of the African American spiritual tradition. Is the AME Church an example of Black people harmonizing African ancestral spirituality with Christianity in the same manner that Santeria is harmonized with Catholicism?
Not just the AME, the entire Black church system was a syncretism. The AME Church was one example of it, and they retained the name African Methodist Episcopal. But before there was an AME Church in Savannah, Georgia, there was an African Baptist Church. That's the oldest church. And most of the leader of that church fought with the British against the American in the Revolutionary War. So he was evacuated. His number three person stayed and continued the African Baptist Church, which you'll find in Georgia and South Carolina today. But he was sent to Jamaica, and he started the Pokemon movement in Jamaica. And part of that community you call in the Rasta community, that was founded by the man who founded the Black Baptist, African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. So that's why history erases a lot of the mystery, and things that we think are different is not different at all, right? We have to learn these stories through history. So yes, the AME Church is a syncretism. The African Baptist Church is a syncretism. The holiness, what we call the holiness church. If you go to the Seventh Day Adventists and you close that door, you're in Africa. You know what I'm saying? Now some of them have got a little cute, modernized and stuff. But back in the day, you was throwing down Africa. You know, the
Hmm.
music, the dance, the interpretation of the literature. Because somebody's reading a scripture from the Bible, but it's the interpretation of that scripture that is
Hmm.
significant to instructing and informing that person who came to church that day on how to behave once they walk out that door at the end of the day. So no, our people knew, but the only sanctuary we had was the church. It wasn't like we could build this thing here, build this there. No, we had that skeleton of the
Hmm.
European theocratic or theocracy, and we filled that skeleton in with an African being, male and female, recalling as much of themselves as they could, hiding
Hmm.
it in their music and their dance and their
Hmm.
interpretation of scripture and the attitude and behavior, collective, communal, and cooperative towards one another.
Yes. Along those lines, you mentioned how your mother, people in your family were root women, and it reminds me of
But she
Charles
was also the
Mason,
mother of the church,
mother,
and her husband was
church
the
mothers.
preacher.
Yes. So it reminds me of Charles Mason, who is one of the founders of the Church of God in Christ, Kojic.
Mhm,
And if you Google him, one of the first pictures that's sure to pop up is him with his spiritual tools, his spiritual technology, a table full of various herbs that he worked with.
mhm.
And and so I bring that up because I hope that we don't lose sight of our spiritualness as we continue in the
Well, we
various
have, we,
religions.
we have, and that's part of the problem with the church today. So
Hmm.
I hope this conversation we having let people know you can go back,
Yes.
because then it's like Sankofa, go back and fetch it. We left
Fetch it.
something there.
Hmm.
Go back there and find it. But you're not going to be able to find what we left in the church because you won't recognize it. Now you
Hmm.
got to go back to Africa in literature and study, if not actually. So when you go to the church, you could mirror, the mirror is real then.
So with that, on that point right there, Baba, there are like at least 5 or 6 questions from people asking, how do I begin? What would be the first step for someone wanting to begin to embrace African sacred science? Joshua specifically asked, and I'm asking this particular one that has that same theme, and you'll know why in a moment. he writes, as a traveling man, where do I go to increase my knowledge and connection to spirituality, ascension, and African consciousness? Are there other schools of thoughts that I should search for outside of the lodge? And I'm going to combine that with, again, the other people asking what can be some first steps or paths, books, resources for beginning their journey with African sacred science. But I wanted to frame it around the lodge.
I'm looking, yeah. So, to my brother, I'm a traveling man. I'm in Cornerstone, 37, um, Prince Hall Grand Lodge in the state of New York. I'm very proud of being Prince Hall Mason. I'm very proud of the work that Prince Hall and those brothers did in creating the lodge for us. We know the lodge had its birth in ancient Africa long before Rome, long before Greece, and certainly long before England. Um, and the lodge represent the same school of thought that we are trying to delineate and discuss now. The lodge represented a body of knowledge that was under attack, and so we had to hide to preserve it and practice it in secret. Um, when you're not under attack, you don't have to hide what you're doing. But the lodge is born out of us being attacked in Northeast Africa. And how do we take that body of knowledge that builds character? You know how they say this when we come into the lodge? It's like, where were you first a Mason? And you say, in my heart. And they ask you, why did you come to the lodge? To make a good man better. And then all the process we go through is the building the character. So it's not fundamentally that different from the Akan tradition, the Yoruba tradition, or any of the other traditions. But there's a good book, and I was looking around because I sit in my library and I usually have books I could do like this. But there's one I always, and I don't remember the brother's name because it is too long. He's a beautiful young Nigerian brother, and it's called Rebirthing African Consciousness. Just do the title and you'll get the book. Rebirthing African Consciousness. And then Stolen Legacy. Because Stolen Legacy gives you a historical foundation and lets you know somebody took something from you. And what they took from you was a body of information on how to understand your own divinity, right? Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James, and the book Rebirthing African Consciousness. And I was looking for my Baba's book, but now I got so much stuff up here, I don't know what what to recommend. But those two, I think, are essential reading because there's thousands of others. Booker Hiawatha Coleman, his book on African spirituality before religion. I think that's an enormous and important work that will inform you. And then look at the bibliography all of these people are using. And the bibliography will guide you to even more books that is significant. But those three I'll leave with you. You know, if you can get a chance to get the pyramid text, it doesn't really matter. Well, I have Faulkner's, I think, but the pyramid text has so much information. And you remember, the pyramid text is older than the Torah, the Quran, or the Bible. And I remember Tony was a part of a group we were in called the Kimware Science Consortium back in the day. And Uncle Rob was one of the brothers who translated this piece thing. Tony Browder was one of the brothers. Um, the brother from Congo. Oh goodness, what's the professor from Congo? Congo Brazzaville. But anyway, they translated a portion of the pyramid text that dealt with the Genesis story. And it went kind of like this, if I can remember it after all these years. This is Amun speaking, and Amun represents that which is hidden but yet manifests all. And it says, I create myself out of myself. I cause existence to exist so that existing might exist. And when I realized that I existed, Ma'at was at my side, the feminine principle of the universe. God didn't bring it into being. when he realized that God existed, my aunt was at his side. And he said, I coughed up shoe and I spat out Tefnut, the air and the gases that makes up cosmology. And they gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the elements in the sky. And Nut and Geb would have love, and they would give birth to a Sar and a Set, and to Nephthys and and Set. And so it is the Genesis story that the people borrowed from. And then he goes further and says, I created um, uh, the mountain, but he was talking about matter. And he said, I created the matter. And then I created the energy. Oh, Ptah. Ptah is the primordial hill, it's matter. And then I created uh, Ra, which is symbolized by the sun, which is energy. And then it said, having created everything that my heart desired, I, the divine causation, expanded in it. But then it doesn't finish yet. And then he says, this is God now, the super African God, the big man, Amen himself. After creating everything and expanded in it, then it says, I turned to my mother, Nun, the black primordial waters, and thank her for my begetting. You got to read this stuff. We got some bad stuff about there, you know. So just getting into our studies, right? It just wakes you up. So those three books, especially Rebirthing African Consciousness, the title alone, you'll be able to find it. And then Stolen Legacy by James, which is essential to see what they stole from you know, and how serious this thing is when you don't have the knowledge necessary to govern how you develop your character and reconstruct yourself. You know? And what was the third one? Ah, Hiawatha Coleman book on spirituality before religion. Those three books should really give you a good foundation, and look at the bibliography used.
Okay, so we are coming towards the end of our session tonight. I am going to ask one more question, but before I do that, I do want to let everyone know that this presentation will be available in a few days on IKG's YouTube page. Um, I would like Professor Smalls, if people want to contact you or email you with questions, do you have
Mm.
a email address that they can send it, that they can
Yeah,
write
it's
to you?
it's actually my name, Ampansa3, AMPONSA3 at gmail.com. Or they
And I'm
can go,
typing that in the chat.
yeah, or they can go to my Facebook page, Professor Small African World.com.
Okay, so if your question is not answered tonight, please you may email him to get more information. Also, Baba, do you have a Cash app where people can make donations as a way to say thank you?
That's good because I'm on them broke poppers. It's like the system all of your life, and then you realize, oh wow! But I've always been blessed. The ancestors have never let me be without.
Yeah.
Yes, it's Dr. James, cash $, Dr. James Small.
So
Mm-hmm.
DrJamesSMAll.
SMAL. Yeah.
Okay, so $JAMESSMALL. Okay, so I'm putting that also in the chat. So, family, please show your gratitude, your thanks, your love, and appreciation for tonight's master class. And what I'm going to end it with this last question because I think it ties back in everything that we've been saying in terms of using this information for one's own personal, family, community, and our people's liberation. And this is coming from Jeriel. Professor Small, how can I start to know myself if I haven't been through the African rites of passage? even more so since I don't know which aspects of my ancestors are within me in order to guide me on this life journey.
Mhm.
Should I
I'm gonna,
repeat that?
no, ma'am,
No.
because there's a, um, especially for sisters, but for brothers too. I used to give the. I remember when I first started giving this instruction, the sister thought like, "You are just being fresh, Professor." Start practicing waking up in the morning after your bathing, after your showering, and while still in your birthday suit, sit in front of the mirror and have a conversation with yourself. Do that every morning for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and ask the same questions you just asked me. Look in that mirror at that person in that mirror. And if that person is not who you want them to be, make them in who you want them to be. Start practicing it. First, it's going to be a little kooky, a little difficult. They're you sitting there buck naked, looking at yourself in the mirror, having a conversation with yourself. Remember, you're not just having that conversation with yourself, you're having that conversation with your ancestors and in turn with the divine. And as your sincerity grow in that exercise, you will begin to transcend. And the very answer you're looking for, you will find you've always had it. It's just that you've never looked for it before. I hope that helps.
I'm going to share a short story about your advice. Family, take his advice. Take his advice. I'm gonna tell you, Baba. Years ago, probably around 2008 or so, I gave you a call. We had a conversation. I
Really?
was in graduate school at Howard in my doctoral program, and I just could not figure out my dissertation topic. I had an idea. I had all these thoughts around African spirituality and how can I bring it all together. And you told me, sister, write about you. Who are you?
Mhm.
Who are you? Start there. And so I ended up writing about the Khan spiritual tradition in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And that was and it came through because of a phone call with you. And so you
Oh,
might not know that, but when you
I,
told
I
me to go
didn't have a
within,
clue.
you told me to go within, and I went and I meditated on that.
Mhm.
And that is when the specific topic came to me. So Madasi, thank you so very much.
Oh,
And
Madasi P.
yes,
Mhm.
so great advice, family. Please join me in welcome and thanking, excuse me,
Thank you.
Professor James
Thank you.
Smalls for tonight's again
Well, thank you for
magnificent class.
inviting me. It was a wonderful opportunity. You know, I have great respect for this forum. I have a great respect for one of his founders, Brother Anthony. That's my brother.
Hmm.
Um, and I love my people because in the Yoruba, they say, look at me, you belong to me, I belong to you. In South Africa, they say, Ubuntu,
Hmm.
you and me, we're the same
Yes,
being.
yes.
Um, and so we have to just never forget that
Hmm.
I am you and you are me.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you all. I want to invite you all out to our next Wisdom Wednesday, which will take place July 16th here, Zoom webinar. We will have the chef Kepra Anu, chef, raw foodist here speaking on fasting to a healthier you. That will be his topic, fasting to a healthier you with Kepra Anu. Family, thank you again. And you may go to ikgculturalresourcecenter.com to find out more about our Wisdom Wednesday programs and other programming by IKG, including our Egypt on the Potomac field trips and lectures and events by Tony Browder. Thank you, family, and have a great evening. Peace.
Yes, peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. Love you